Today we're asking the question, where did the art go in aesthetics? And also at the heart of both art and aesthetics, are we subjects or are we objects? How much have we allowed ourselves to become objectified in our own personal experiences? And what does that distinction mean for the way we look after our own aesthetic appearance, how we engage in photography and social media, and how we care for not only our own beauty and identity, but for those around us and greater society? And when I say beauty, I mean the broader and deeper sense of beauty that applies to everyone, regardless of gender, and is a timeless entity. Leonardo da Vinci once observed that art is never finished, only abandoned. As a clinical perfectionist with my patients, I know the truth behind this. With every patient, at every treatment, there's a point where I stop and I work with them to agree that this is today's endpoint of beauty, that it's enough, and as always, they are enough. My decision around this is straightforward, but the deeper processes are complex. It's informed by my own appreciation of the beauty of the patient, most definitely the safety of not too much, and also my ethics. Natural, undetectable aesthetics shouldn't be a trend ever. For me, it's been the foundation of my goals for all my patients for more than 20 years, but we've seen the converse of this: poor and decidedly unaesthetic outcomes everywhere. That's why today's conversation is so important. My guest is Andrew Moseley, art curator, lecturer, and founder of Moseley Art Consultancy. Andrew also designed and founded the Photography and Socially Engaged Practice BA course at UCEN Manchester in partnership with the Open Eye Gallery in Liverpool, a pioneering programme that treats subjects not as passive objects, but as collaborators with the artist in shaping their own truth through the media of art. Together we'll explore the intersection of art and aesthetics. And remember, please subscribe, like, leave a review, or share this conversation with someone you love. Andrew, welcome to Ageless. Medical aesthetics and cosmetic surgery has helped the quality of life and the self-confidence of so many people worldwide. But I really feel and believe that the actual practice of aesthetics as a principle and as an art form has been somewhat forgotten and somewhat abused within this medical specialty as well. And I think a lot of people have been harmed. And I think returning back to art as a principle is a really good starting point for today. I love the fact that when we have conversations, you describe us as image creators, where aesthetics and art meet. I'd really like to ask you, how do you think we put art back into aesthetics?
First of all, we need to look at the lens of art and the lens of beauty and what that gaze actually is. Because
okay.
I think if we look at art history and photography's history as well, it's got quite a checkered history of who is the person behind the lens and who's making those ideals and what beauty actually is. So for me, I think that we need to bring the subjects into that discussion where, rather than it being one idealised imagination of what beauty actually is, then we reach out at the communities and we look at a more diverse spectrum of beauty.
What is the history of photography that you're just mentioning that has that checkered past? Where did it start?
Well, if we look at the inception of photography, it was invented around the same time as colonial times, and the Victorians were, of course, obsessed with collecting everything, collecting plants and fauna, and travelling to all around the globe to collect these kind of specimens. But they were doing the exact same thing with cultures, and they were photographing people. I mean, there's early imagery of tribes, for example, who were photographed against a yardstick to take the measurements of body parts and all that kind of thing, where people were really objectified. And so I think a lot of what I try and look at, particularly in the programme that I lecture on, is to readdress some of that history and for us to be aware of our social responsibilities as image makers, which is where I think there's a real parallel between both our worlds.
Yeah. the social responsibility piece, I know both of us really share a passion for that. So when you talk about social responsibility within photography and you lecture on this, tell me a little bit more about what you speak on.
Well, traditionally, I think photography, even if we look at the language of photography, when we talk about going on a shoot or a lens hunting or whatever it might be, there's all these kind of definitions and language even that ties into like the physical act of hunting. And photography has long, even the idea of capturing an image, again, it has these kind of references to the idea of hunting and taking something. And that's how photography has long been viewed. What I'm trying to do is to hand back some of the authorship of imagery to the subjects themselves, and so that they have a genuine input into the image and they are an active part of the whole process. And I think this is where we could bring a similar approach into aesthetics, where the client, the patient, is an active part of that process rather than having beauty done to them.
Yes, definitely. So you're really differentiating between subject and object there. And I suppose thinking about all the different types of photography.
What I'm talking about is more that the subject, or what was previously deemed to be a subject of a photograph, now becomes the author of the image.
Right.
They're actively involved in every kind of process.
Yes.
And that's the same for community groups, rather than a photographer in going into a community, whatever that community may be, and taking photographs to document a certain culture or community, that we give that community the tools to empower themselves to produce their own imagery, or at least understand what the process is.
Yeah, and this is so aligned with how I practice within my surgery and within my studio. I think it would be assumed, again, that surely the patient that's walking through the door would have a big participation, give direction or whatever. I think it definitely has to be a collaboration, the word that you've used, and a really deep conversation. I think actually consultation, there is an art to consultation. And even this week, I'm giving 2 lectures on the art of consultation and the ethics behind it. Because in so many practices, I think around the world, you know, there's a lot of patients walking through the door. It can be a little bit of a factory line situation. And it can be really reduced and minimized to, I'm worried about my wrinkles. Can you just get rid of them? And that can be, you know, presenting complaint by a patient. But then what happens after that? I mean, people can present in many different ways, but does the doctor then just create what they believe to be beautiful? Are they actually even thinking about that necessarily? Or are they just erasing lines? Or are they following trends? Oh, well, actually, we need to probably do your nose or your cheeks or your jawline or your lips. You know, are they thinking in those compartmentalized ways? Or actually, are they thinking as a whole in a 360 degrees? And I have to say, when I'm teaching, you know, there's been a lot, thousands of doctors I've taught over the years. It's less common for people to really step back and see the person in entirety. So I think there's that part of it, which is the physical part, but then there's the driving motivation and really understanding who the person is, why they're there, and how they actually want to express themselves. So in your work, how do you help the subject understand who they are and how they want to express themselves through art and through imagery?
Yeah, it's a big question, of course, and I think it's really interesting the way that you're talking about how you're actually giving lectures on consultation, and for me, we're talking about art, but conversation can be an art form. Art doesn't have to be this kind of a 2D object that we place on the wall, and it all begins with conversation. And so if I'm going into a community, or sending a group of students into a community, for several weeks before the project even begins, they will be going in there without any cameras or anything, just to kind of discuss with the community how they want to be perceived. Of course, it's important to note that not every community is best positioned to realise the impacts of imagery on themselves, where I think that's where we have a really crucial social role in that also. But we would go into communities, we would gain their trust, we would hold conversations, and quite often we wouldn't even actually be taking the photographs. We've had a lot of situations where a student group would go into a community and actually teach them photography over maybe a 6-week period, and they end up actually photographing each other. Beautiful. So they really are an active part of the process.
Beautiful.
So it's kind of handing that control and almost, well, it's a form of power in what we both do. I mean, if we look at photography, we look at the arts, and we look at aesthetics, and we are in a very powerful position. And so I think it starts with us being aware of that and what our social responsibilities are. Yeah,
it definitely comes down to the ethics behind being an artist, being a photographer, and definitely being a doctor. One of the books here that I co-authored was Moving the Needle on Ethics, and where I created an ethical compass, because yet again, the art of consultation is assumed within medicine, but so are ethics. And so I created this ethical compass, and it has 4 points. Obviously, the true north should always be the safety of the patient and what's best for the patient, of course, based upon our Hippocratic oaths, etc. But it has these components of conscience. So this moral intuition that we have, that we know what is right. And so I encourage doctors to really tune in to what that intuition is. And especially when we're living in a very dynamic, fast-paced world, and particularly within cosmetic surgery and medical aesthetics, it's so consumer-driven and it's so trends-driven that, you'll have patients that walk in through the door and they want the latest trend, and there obviously needs to be a very clear education process as to if that's going to be right for them or not. And then there's other aspects like principles, values, beliefs. What do we hold to be true? What do we think is really important in life? All of these contribute to those biases, don't they? And I think that these are really crucial to co-partner with the patient, and that takes time, that consultation process. Then in terms of what goes on from that is, if we were to just hand over to the patient, okay, you take complete authority and complete ownership over this process, then that has risks too when it comes to medicine, because we're using drugs, we're doing interventional procedures, doesn't matter how minimally invasive. These things have side effects. And even if there's a minimal level of medical side effects, it doesn't necessarily mean that the aesthetic outcome will be ideal for them. Everyone's anatomy is different, everyone's skin is different. So those parts come into the art of consultation, where we have to do it in a collaborative form. Going back to what you were saying, which I think is more so that those subjects can have more ownership and agency over what's being produced. What kind of communities do you work with?
We work with a huge range of communities, but just kind of going back to that point, because I think it's really interesting about the ethics around it. And you're right that it's a dangerous position to be, to completely hand over that authorship to a patient. And it's similar within photography and within the wider arts as well, that if we're going into a community, lots of documentary photographers, for example, will feel it's enough in going to a community and just getting that community to agree to what they're doing. But I think it's important to note, and this is another kind of parallel, that those people may not always be best positioned to make the correct choices for themselves, which is where our responsibility as professionals come in. And so I think there's a lot of parity there, and just kind of talk about the ethics. I'm very aware that I'm a program director on the degree program where I'm working in a department, in a university, which is very white, it's very middle class, it's very male.
Okay.
And so when we talk about ethics and our bias and our kind of visions, because it's impossible almost to not have a bias, because and we could take a picture, me or you could go to the same area, but as soon as we hold a camera up, we are already making choices and editing areas out of what we're actually including in the viewfinder. And those choices are made by our age, our sex, our cultures, our upbringings, our backgrounds, and all those things affect our bias, be it as artists or practitioners, which is okay. But I think it starts with us being aware that it's impossible to almost be impartial.
It starts with the awareness.
Yeah, and so I think that's important to know, because I'm very aware that I'm a white and middle-aged guy, and so I think I can only have a certain kind of perspective. So it's about education, educating ourselves, speaking to communities. But just to answer your question as to what communities that we go in, I've worked on projects in Italy where we've worked with the refugee community coming over on the Adriatic coast into Venice. I've worked with homeless people, areas that are deemed to be in need, different kind of cultures. So right across the board, and the approach is always the same. It's about holding conversations, finding out how they want to be perceived, and trying to empower them to be making their own imagery, rather than us just kind of turning up, asking if it's okay to take a picture and walking away. Because I'm also really aware that even when we work on community projects, that we can quite often go into a community and think we're doing this incredible way of working to empower people. And we're there for 6 to 12 weeks, and then we walk away. And so what happens then? Yes. And so I'm always really aware of that. And so it could be some a simple thing, be it education, teaching them skills they may not have, be it photography, be it creative writing, just so we're not just kind of turning up and leaving and then without any actual impact. And so I think it's important to think of the long-term kind of benefits of what we do as well.
Oh, I love what you're saying. And in terms of this course that you're the program director of, is this common within photography and within arts degrees and courses?
Unfortunately not. There's a brilliant course at the University of Coventry, which has a real focus on socially engaged practice. But apart from that course, it's only really ourselves who've kind of named this stuff. You look at a lot of photography programs and they just call the photography BA. But I was very keen on having a unique offer.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
You know, creating that leadership that's so important culturally, and especially moving forward with the importance and the relevance of photography and social media. I also, again, see a mirror with regards to my industries where, again, when I'm speaking and teaching, again, the amount of learning I have to do myself before I go into a different country and work with different communities, I spend a huge amount of time, you know, looking at the literature, working on the research, trying to really understand what's culturally happening within these communities. And I'm always really stunned, again, by how many medical practitioners aren't as socially aware. I'm not saying as me, but in terms of just keeping up to date, you know, it's such an ongoing process.
And you need to be engaged in what you're doing, and you need to be passionate.
Yeah.
And then it's research, it's finding out what people, the situation. I turn up in a community, and the same as you, I've researched it, but I'm going in there to learn.
100%.
Yeah,
100%.
And so it goes back to including our subjects, not as subjects, but as people who are actively involved in that process, in that conversation, because I can only see things from the perspective of being a white middle
Your own
class
bias.
male. Yeah. And so I want to learn, I want to hand over that kind of authorship and try and support people to be portrayed in the way they want to be portrayed. That's kind of where I base myself.
I love it. Same. Absolutely the same. And it's those blind spots, isn't it? We don't necessarily always know our own blind spots in terms of bias. And then how we then, well, certainly as medical practitioners, how that is then projected onto patients, and then those patients become communities, because we're treating a lot of different types of people. So I think it's really crucial to look at those blind spots. And the last little question I wanted to ask you was, what can we learn from photographers and artists as medical practitioners, as patients thinking about going on a journey of aesthetic improvement? What kind of tips can we learn, about light, about setting, about harmony?
I think rather than those kind of technical aspects, the biggest thing for me, without doubt, is being mindful of what a powerful medium we're both working with. When we think, we said at the start about the parity between us both being image makers, just being aware of the power of the roles that we have, and really being considerate of our responsibilities around that.
Basically, us taking back our ethics, which should never waver, they should never differ, and they should never disappear. But I do think that they can evolve to be more inclusive, and they need to stay up to date. So I think that is such a huge part of what we do. Thank you for bringing that energy. Really appreciate your time, Andrew.
My absolute pleasure.
And thank you. Thank you for joining Andrew and I for this episode of Ageless. Our conversation today has been a reminder that whether we're working in the gallery or in the clinic, we are engaged in the same essential task of working with more than an aesthetic, but the human identity and personal story that lies within. We've also touched on bias, how age, culture, and ingrained ideals inevitably shape the lens through which we see. To ignore these forces is to risk reproducing exclusion. To acknowledge them is the first step towards practicing inclusivity and towards building a new ethical compass for beauty and art. And for those either receiving aesthetic treatments or considering embarking on it, my advice to you is really think about what a beautiful, harmonious outcome means to you, and in relation to your own natural proportions. If you find that difficult to visualize or describe, then find a practitioner who really understands your goals and can help you in that process. Leonardo da Vinci knew that art was never finished. And in the same way, our practice, whether as artists, doctors, or humans, is never complete. It evolves with every choice we make and every life we encounter. If you found this conversation valuable, please subscribe, share it with someone you care about, and let us know the questions you'd like answered in future episodes. And as a thank you for being here, you can also redeem an exclusive free skin consultation and enjoy 15% off the One Dermafacial for better skin health with my team at One Aesthetic Studio. Simply follow the link in the show notes and enter the code IDENTITY15 at checkout. So the question I leave you with today is, when you think about beauty, your own or others, are you seeing an object to be perfected or a subject with a story to help unfold? Until next time, I'm Dr. Jonquille Chantrey, and this has been Ageless.